Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be trying to understand PTSD a little bit better, post-traumatic stress disorder, and kind of go beyond some of those common misconceptions that are out there, really try to paint a better picture of what it's like to actually live with PTSD. And we're doing this through some pretty interesting material.
Yeah.
We have an introduction to a Swedish platform called Statistical, which tackles critical social issues, and they have a deep dive into PTSD.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so I'm super curious about this platform and how they're using AI to drive these discussions.
Yeah, what's interesting to me is they're very upfront about the fact that the AI could make mistakes or even interrupt the flow of the conversation. They're really kind of embracing the imperfections there, which is pretty refreshing.
That is super interesting. It makes you wonder how they're using it to have these sensitive discussions about PTSD. And they don't shy away from any tough topics. They have everything from mental health and domestic violence to racism, exclusion, and addiction.
They're not shying away from anything.
No, they're not.
Yeah.
It seems like they're really committed to addressing these complex issues.
Yeah, that's a big undertaking.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, they're aiming to raise awareness, break down prejudices, and foster empathy.
It's like they're creating a space for really honest and real conversations. But before we get into all that, I think it might be helpful to just take a step back and look at how our understanding of PTSD has evolved over time.
Yeah.
It's interesting to think that it wasn't always a recognized illness.
You're absolutely right. I mean, just think about it. During World War I, they called it Kriegsneurose or war neurosis.
Oh, wow.
And then in World War II, it was combat fatigue. The language itself really reflects how it was viewed.
It seems like it was really downplayed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until 1980
that
PTSD was officially recognized as a diagnosis.
Really?
In the DSM-III.
Yeah.
The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders.
So that's really a turning point in our understanding. Now, does the Swedish term post-traumatic stress syndrome carry any different connotations than
That's an interesting question.
PTSD in English?
I'm not really sure about specific connotations, but I do think that having a specific term for it really speaks to the awareness and recognition of the condition there.
So let's get into the science a bit.
Yeah.
How does PTSD actually affect the brain? I mean, we hear about fight or flight, but what's going on neurologically?
Well, research has shown that PTSD can cause actual changes in brain function, particularly in areas like the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the prefrontal cortex.
Right. So those are the areas that deal with fear and memory and emotional regulation. I'm guessing that with PTSD, they might not be working the way that they should.
You got it. And it's really that dysfunction that leads to the various symptoms of PTSD.
But what's so interesting is that not everyone who experiences a trauma develops PTSD.
Right.
So it's not just the trauma itself.
It's much more complex than that. The nature of the trauma is a factor, of course. The length, the intensity, and the type of trauma all play a role. Statistical actually has a really insightful AI-driven discussion on this.
Yeah.
And one participant shared how repeated exposure to domestic violence can really have that cumulative effect, making someone more susceptible to PTSD.
So the more intense and prolonged the exposure to the trauma, the greater the potential impact on the brain.
Exactly.
But Statistical also brought up how individual vulnerability can play a huge role.
They did. In one of their discussions, they pointed out that genetics might make some individuals more prone to developing PTSD than others.
Yeah.
If someone has a family history of mental health disorders, they might be at higher risk.
So our genes can actually influence how we respond to trauma.
That seems so.
What about past experiences? Do those matter?
Absolutely. Statistical highlighted this as well. They found that previous traumatic experiences, especially those that happened during childhood, can increase someone's vulnerability to PTSD later in life.
Almost like our brains develop a sensitivity based on our past.
That's a good way to put it. And let's not forget about social support.
Okay.
Having that strong network of friends and family can act as a buffer, reducing the risk of developing PTSD.
So it sounds like having people around you that you can rely on.
It can make a world of difference.
And that understand what you're going through can really make a difference.
It does. Statistical even has a section dedicated to helping people build those supportive communities, both online and offline.
Wow.
They really emphasize the importance of finding people who validate your experiences and provide a sense of belonging.
So we've been talking about the factors that contribute to developing PTSD, but what does it actually feel like to live with PTSD day in and day out? How does it affect your daily life?
Well, it can be profoundly debilitating.
Yeah.
And the symptoms are often grouped into 4 categories: re-experiencing avoidance, negative thoughts and feelings, and hyperarousal.
So let's break those down. Starting with re-experiencing, what does that involve?
Imagine being suddenly hit with these vivid flashbacks, nightmares, or intrusive memories of that traumatic event that, like, you're reliving it all over again.
So even
Statistical shared a story from a woman who was constantly triggered by the smell of gasoline because it reminded her of a car accident.
Wow. So seemingly insignificant things can really trigger these reactions.
Anything that reminds the person of the trauma can really transport them back to that moment.
And that brings us to avoidance.
Exactly.
They try to avoid anything associated with the trauma.
They're trying to protect themselves from pain and distress.
But I would imagine that avoidance could actually make things worse in the long run.
It can. It prevents them from really confronting their fears and processing what happened.
It's like a vicious cycle. What about negative thoughts and feelings?
Stokie.nu has a forum dedicated to this. And users share their experiences with feelings of guilt, shame, worthlessness, and difficulty experiencing joy. They talk about struggling with relationships, isolating themselves, and having these persistent negative thoughts about themselves and the world.
It sounds incredibly isolating and emotionally draining.
And then we add hyperarousal, which adds another layer of complexity.
Okay.
Imagine being constantly on edge, easily startled, irritable. You have sleep problems, difficulty concentrating, and it feels like you're always on high alert.
So it's like their fight or flight response is stuck in the on position.
Got it.
I can't imagine living a normal life feeling like that all the time.
That's exhausting. And Stokie.nu talks about how these symptoms make it really hard to hold down a job, maintain relationships, or even just leave the house sometimes.
So living with PTSD is clearly a daily struggle. What does a typical day look like?
Well, imagine waking up already feeling anxious and restless, maybe from a nightmare or just a general sense of dread.
So the day starts with a weight already on their shoulders, and then you go about your day.
And then as you go about your day, those seemingly insignificant triggers can pop up out of nowhere. A certain sound, a smell, or a glimpse of something that reminds you of the trauma.
And that sends them right back to that event.
And because of this, social situations can be a minefield.
Oh, wow.
The fear of having a panic attack or flashback in public can be debilitating, leading to isolation and withdrawal. They shared one story about a man who felt completely unable to attend his daughter's wedding because he was so afraid of being triggered by the crowd.
That is heartbreaking. They're constantly on guard trying to navigate a world.
You've hit the nail on the head.
That doesn't always understand.
And it's crucial to remember that the impact of PTSD extends beyond the individual.
Right.
It touches their families, their communities, and society as a whole. And that's something Stokie.nu emphasizes as well.
That's a good point. We've been talking about the individual experience, but what about the people who love and support them?
They play a crucial role, and navigating that role can be challenging.
Yeah, I would imagine.
Stokie.nu offers a lot of resources for loved ones, emphasizing the importance of providing support without judgment.
So not trying to fix them,
but
just be there for them.
And that often starts with simply listening, giving your loved one the space to share their experiences at their own pace without feeling pressured or judged.
It sounds like Stokie.nu is about building community and support.
That's right.
For both the people with PTSD and their loved ones.
They're creating a space where people can learn from each other, share their experiences, and find strength in knowing they're not alone.
Now, this is where their AI comes in. I'm curious how they're using AI to facilitate these sensitive conversations about PTSD.
Well, think of it as a facilitator or moderator. Their AI helps organize discussions, filter out any inappropriate content, and connect people with shared experiences.
That's really interesting.
It's like a digital support group with an intelligent guide.
But what about those errors and interruptions we talked about?
Well, they're surprisingly transparent about it. They acknowledge that the AI is still under development and might make mistakes. They even encourage users to flag any errors or biases they encounter so they can improve the system.
So they're inviting the users to be part of the development process.
They're not presenting the AI as a perfect solution, but rather as a tool that can be constantly refined and improved.
That's a fascinating approach. But for our listeners who might not have access to this platform, what can they do to help a loved one with PTSD?
One of the most important things is to offer practical help. Where you can assisting with daily tasks, accompanying them to appointments, or simply being there to listen.
So showing up for them.
Precisely, in tangible ways.
And don't underestimate the power of encouraging professional help.
Okay.
There are effective therapies available, like CBT and EMDR.
Correct. That have proven to be really helpful.
So being a supportive advocate.
Exactly.
And helping them find the resources and the treatment that they need.
And one final piece of advice.
Okay.
Remember to take care of yourself as well.
Right.
Supporting someone with PTSD can be emotionally taxing.
Yeah.
So make sure to prioritize your own well-being.
It's like the oxygen mask on an airplane.
Exactly.
So we've covered a lot here, the historical context, the science behind it, and the challenges of living with this condition. But I think it's important to understand how PTSD is portrayed in media and popular culture, because those portrayals can really shape public perception. And Stokic.nu had an interesting take on this.
They did an analysis of how PTSD is represented in films and TV shows.
And what'd they find?
What they found was pretty eye-opening. There's this tendency to portray people with PTSD as either violent and dangerous or broken and helpless.
And those stereotypes can be incredibly damaging because it perpetuates those harmful misconceptions
that we've been talking about.
It makes it harder for people to seek help or feel comfortable talking about their experiences.
It can make people...
Stokic.nu even shared an anecdote from a veteran who said he was hesitant to tell anyone about his PTSD because he was afraid people would think he was crazy or a ticking time bomb.
So it's so crucial to challenge these stereotypes and offer more nuanced and accurate portrayals of PTSD.
And that's what Stokic.nu is actively working towards.
Okay.
They're partnering with filmmakers and writers to develop stories that portray PTSD in a more realistic and sensitive way.
So they're using media as a tool for education and empathy.
And they're not just focusing on the individual experience, but also on the broader societal impact. They're exploring how PTSD affects families, communities, and even entire cultures.
So a holistic approach.
Exactly.
Recognizing that it's not just an individual problem, but a collective one. And this is where those AI-driven discussions become even more valuable.
I'm curious to hear more about that. How are they using AI to engage in these broader conversations about PTSD?
Well, imagine a forum where people from all over the world can share their experiences, their perspectives, and their ideas for creating a more supportive and understanding world for those with PTSD.
So a global dialogue.
Precisely.
Breaking down those geographical and cultural barriers.
When their AI helps facilitate these conversations by translating languages, identifying common themes, and connecting people with shared experiences.
So it's more than just information. It's about fostering connection and understanding across cultures.
What makes Stokic.nu so unique is that they're using technology to create this human-centered approach to addressing PTSD.
It really is a fascinating case study in using technology to tackle.
It is. It makes you wonder what other possibilities are out there.
Oh.
But let's bring it back to Stokic.nu for a moment.
They're doing all this amazing work, but I'm curious, what kind of impact are they actually having?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And it's not always easy to measure impact when it comes to social change.
Right.
But Stokic.nu is trying to track their progress in a few different ways. For example, they're looking at how many people are participating in their discussions, how those discussions are evolving, and whether they're seeing any shifts in attitudes and perceptions.
So it's not just about numbers, it's about the quality of the conversations and the potential for real change.
They're also looking at anecdotal evidence, like personal stories from individuals who have benefited from the platform. For instance, they shared a story about a woman who was struggling with isolation and shame due to her PTSD. She said that participating in Stokic.nu's discussions helped her realize that she wasn't alone and that there was hope for recovery.
It's amazing how connecting with others
Yeah.
can be so transformative.
It speaks to the importance of creating spaces where people feel safe and supported.
Right.
But of course, Statistical isn't a cure-all.
Okay, so what are some of their limitations then?
Well, for one, they're reliant on technology. Not everyone has access to the internet
Right.
or feels comfortable using online platforms.
Yeah, especially when it comes to
Especially when it comes to
sensitive topics.
sensitive topics like PTSD.
So it highlights the digital divide and the need to make sure that everyone has equal access.
Absolutely. And then there's the issue of language barriers.
Right.
While their AI can translate languages, it's not always perfect.
Yeah.
There can be nuances lost in translation,
Yeah.
which can hinder understanding and connection.
So we still need those human translators
That's
and
it.
cultural mediators
Yeah.
to help bridge those gaps.
And they are working on addressing these limitations.
Okay.
They're exploring ways to make their platform more accessible
Mm-hmm.
to people with limited internet access.
Yeah.
And they're partnering with organizations to provide in-person support groups and resources.
So they're really committed to making their platform as inclusive and effective.
They are. And their efforts are paying off. They're gaining recognition from mental health organizations
Well, that's great.
and government agencies as a valuable resource
Really?
for those with PTSD and their loved ones.
That's fantastic. It's a testament to the power of innovation and collaboration.
Yeah.
We've talked about the causes, the symptoms, the societal impact, and the role of these platforms like Statistical.
Right.
But what about the individual journey of healing and recovery? What does that look like?
It's unique for each individual, but there are some common themes.
Okay.
One is the importance of seeking professional help. Therapy with techniques like CBT and EMDR
Right.
can be incredibly effective in helping people process their trauma,
Right.
manage their symptoms, and develop coping mechanisms.
So it's not about erasing the trauma,
Exactly.
but learning to live with it in a healthy way.
And medication can also play a role
Okay.
in managing those symptoms like anxiety,
Yeah.
depression, and sleep disturbances.
So finding the right combination
Precisely.
to meet the individual's needs.
And beyond therapy and medication, there are other things that individuals can do to support their recovery.
Gotcha.
Things like exercise,
Uh-huh.
mindfulness practices, and connecting with nature have all been shown to have positive effects.
So taking a holistic approach, the mind, the body, and the spirit.
And this is another area where Statistical shines. They have a whole section dedicated to self-care strategies with tips on everything from yoga and meditation to art therapy and journaling.
So a toolbox for healing and recovery.
It is. And they also emphasize the importance of finding purpose and meaning in life.
Okay.
Many individuals with PTSD find that engaging in activities that give them a sense of purpose can be incredibly therapeutic.
So finding that spark again, that thing that makes life worth living,
Absolutely.
even in the face of trauma.
And this can be anything from volunteering
Yeah.
to pursuing a creative passion to simply spending quality time with loved ones.
So it's not just about managing symptoms, but about
Exhaling a life after trauma.
And that's what recovery is all about. Finding a way to move forward, to find joy and meaning, even after experiencing something so painful.
And what about those who don't have access to these platforms or can't afford therapy?
That's a critical question.
Yeah.
Fortunately, there are a number of free and low-cost resources available.
Okay.
Many communities have mental health clinics
Yeah.
that offer sliding scale fees or work with individuals on payment plans. There are also hotline support groups and online forums where people can connect with others and find support.
So there are options out there,
Yeah.
even if they aren't always easy to find.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that recovery is a journey,
Okay.
not a destination. It's a process that takes time, effort, and often a lot of trial and error.
Right.
There will be setbacks along the way,
Mm-hmm.
but with the right support and resources,
Yes.
healing is possible.
I think it's inspiring to hear stories about people who have overcome these challenges
It is.
and found a way to thrive.
And those stories are a reminder that PTSD is not a life sentence.
Mm-hmm.
It's a condition that can be managed
Yeah.
and overcome with the right support and interventions.
It's not a sign of weakness, and there's no shame in seeking help.
I couldn't agree more. And that's something Statistical is really trying to convey through their platform.
Okay.
They're breaking down the stigma surrounding PTSD and creating a space where people can feel empowered to share their experiences and seek support without judgment.
It's a valuable lesson for all of us to be more compassionate,
Absolutely.
to be more understanding and supportive of those struggling with these mental health challenges.
And speaking of playing a role, I want to shift gears for a moment
Okay.
and talk about something that often gets overlooked in discussions about PTSD.
Okay.
The role of creativity. Stoic.new has a whole section on their platform dedicated to exploring how creative expression can be a powerful tool for healing and recovery.
I love that.
I'm really fascinated by this idea.
Me too. Why do you think that is?
Well, for one, creative expression allows people to process their trauma in a non-threatening way. It gives them an outlet for their emotions and experiences, a way to really externalize what they're going through.
It's like a form of nonverbal communication.
Exactly.
And it can be really empowering.
Incredibly empowering.
Creating something, whether it's a painting, a poem, a song, or even a simple drawing, can give people a sense of agency and control.
Yeah.
Something that's often lost after a trauma.
Beautifully said. And it's not just about individual expression. Creative activities can also foster connection and community.
Oh, so?
Well, think about things like group art therapy, music therapy, or even just sharing your creative work with others.
Okay.
These activities can create a sense of shared experience and understanding.
It's like finding a common language.
Exactly.
A way to connect.
Finding this sense of connection can be really powerful in combating the isolation and loneliness that often accompany PTSD.
So it's not just about expressing yourself,
Precisely.
but about connecting with others and building a sense of community.
And Statistical is doing a fantastic job of facilitating these connections.
How?
They have online forums where people can share their creative work, offer feedback and support, and even collaborate on projects.
Wow.
They also host virtual workshops and events where people can connect with others and explore different forms of creative expression.
They're really tapping into the transformative power of creativity.
They are. And they're not limiting themselves to traditional art forms either.
Okay.
They're exploring everything from digital art and animation
Wow.
to storytelling and spoken word poetry.
So they're creating a space where anything is possible.
Exactly.
Where people can explore their creativity without boundaries or judgment.
And that's what makes their approach so refreshing and inspiring.
Yeah.
They're not just treating PTSD as a medical condition,
Okay.
but as a human experience that can be addressed through a variety of approaches, including creative expression.
I think it's a valuable reminder that healing is a multifaceted process and that creativity can play a crucial role in that process.
I agree. And it's something we should all be encouraging and supporting, both for ourselves and for those around us.
So what are some practical things our listeners can do to incorporate more creativity into their lives or the lives of their loved ones?
Well, it doesn't have to be anything elaborate or expensive.
Okay.
It could be as simple as setting aside some time each day to write in a journal, listen to music, or draw or paint. It could be taking a walk in nature, attending a free art class, or joining a community choir.
Okay.
The important thing is to find something that you enjoy and that allows you to express yourself freely.
So it's not about being good at art. It's about the process of creating and expressing yourself.
And if you're feeling stuck, there are plenty of resources available online and in your community. Stoic.new, for example, has a whole section on their platform dedicated to creative prompts and exercises. There are also countless books, websites, and apps that offer guidance and inspiration.
So there's really no excuse not to give it a try.
I agree. And you might be surprised at how therapeutic and transformative it can be.
Well, this has been a really insightful conversation about the role of creativity in healing and recovery. I'm so glad we took the time to explore this often overlooked aspect of PTSD.
Me too.
But as we wrap up at this part of our deep dive, I want to shift our focus back to the individual experience of PTSD and talk about something that's often difficult to discuss, the impact of trauma on relationships.
That's an important topic. And one that Stoic.new addresses with a lot of sensitivity and nuance.
Okay.
They recognize that PTSD can put a significant strain on relationships, both romantic and platonic.
And why is that?
Well, for one, the symptoms of PTSD, such as hypervigilance, emotional numbing, and difficulty regulating emotions, can make it really challenging to connect with others on a deeper level.
So it's like there's an invisible barrier there.
Yeah, exactly. And those loved ones often feel helpless, frustrated, and even resentful.
Wow.
They might not understand what their loved one is going through. And they might feel like they're walking on eggshells all the time.
Right.
Afraid of saying or doing the wrong thing.
It's a difficult dynamic to navigate.
It can be. And Statistical offers a lot of resources for both individuals with PTSD and their loved ones on how to communicate more effectively, set boundaries, and rebuild trust.
So finding ways to support each other without sacrificing your own needs and well-being.
And that's not always easy.
No, I imagine not.
It often requires a lot of patience, empathy, and a willingness to learn and grow together.
It's a journey.
Exactly.
That's like individual recovery is a journey.
And it's a journey that's worth taking. Because when relationships can weather the storm of PTSD, they often emerge stronger and more resilient than ever before.
That's a beautiful thought. But I know it's not always easy. And sometimes relationships do end as a result of PTSD.
They approach it with a lot of compassion and understanding. They acknowledge that sometimes.
Yeah.
Despite everyone's best efforts, relationships reach a point where they're no longer healthy or sustainable.
And that's okay.
And that's okay. It's important for both individuals to prioritize their own well-being.
Right.
And to seek support during these difficult transitions.
Just sometimes letting go to be an act of self-love and self-preservation.
And Statistical provides resources for navigating breakups and divorce.
Okay.
For coping with the emotional fallout. Okay. And for rebuilding your life after a relationship ends.
So even in the midst of heartbreak,
I agree.
There's hope for healing and for finding new and meaningful connections.
And that's a message we all need to hear sometimes, whether we're dealing with PTSD or any other life challenge.
Well, this has been a really insightful conversation about the complexities of relationships and how they're impacted by PTSD.
It's clear that there's no easy answer.
Yeah.
No one-size-fits-all solution. But I think the most important takeaway is that communication, empathy, and a willingness to seek support are essential for navigating these challenges.
I couldn't agree more. And I'm grateful for platforms like StuGeek.new
Me too.
that are creating spaces for these important conversations to take place. And as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a thought to ponder.
Okay.
We've talked about PTSD as an individual experience, but it's also a societal issue. How can we create a more trauma-informed society, a society that's more understanding and supportive of those who have been affected by trauma?
That's a powerful question.
Yeah.
And one that we all need to be asking ourselves.
It really is a challenge for all of us to think about how we can do better. We've talked about StuGeek.new and all the amazing work they're doing in Sweden. But what about here? What are some things we can do as individuals and as a society to create a more trauma-informed world?
Well, I think first and foremost, we need to start by educating ourselves about trauma and its impact. That means reading books, listening to podcasts, attending workshops, and really engaging in these conversations.
So raising awareness and understanding, both within ourselves and our communities.
And it's not just about understanding the facts, but about developing empathy and compassion for those who've been affected by trauma.
Because knowledge without empathy isn't enough.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
We need to move beyond simply knowing about trauma to actually feeling with those who've experienced it.
Wow.
And that requires us to be more mindful of our language, our assumptions, and our interactions with others.
So being more sensitive and thoughtful in how we approach these conversations.
It's about recognizing that everyone has a story, and that some of those stories might involve trauma. And instead of judging or dismissing those experiences, we need to approach them with curiosity, compassion, and a willingness to listen.
So creating a space where people feel safe and supported to share their experiences.
And that starts by challenging the stigma surrounding trauma and mental health.
Okay.
We need to stop viewing these issues as weaknesses or character flaws and start recognizing them as the real and valid health concerns that they are.
There's no shame in seeking help for mental health.
Exactly.
There's no shame in seeking help for physical health.
And we need to advocate for more accessible and affordable mental health services. Trauma-informed care should be available to everyone, regardless of their income, insurance status, or background.
So that means pushing for policy changes.
You're absolutely right.
Supporting organizations that are doing this work. And speaking out against injustice and inequality.
It's about recognizing that trauma is often rooted in systemic issues like poverty, discrimination, and violence. And we can't address trauma without addressing these underlying causes.
So taking a holistic approach,
Exactly.
individual healing is interconnected with societal healing.
And that requires us to shift our focus from individual blame to collective responsibility.
We need to ask ourselves, how can we create a world where people are less likely to experience trauma in the first place?
That's a big question.
It is.
And it doesn't have a simple answer. But I think it starts by recognizing that we're all interconnected
I agree.
and that our actions have a ripple effect on others.
It's about being more mindful of our impact on the world and making choices that promote healing justice and well-being for all.
So it's more than just raising awareness or donating to a charity. It's about making those conscious choices in our everyday lives to create a more compassionate and equitable world.
It's about those small everyday acts of kindness, empathy, and advocacy that can collectively create a more trauma-informed society.
Recognizing that we all have a role to play.
I agree.
And that even those seemingly small actions can make a difference.
And it's about having hope. Hope that we can create a world where trauma is less prevalent, where healing is more accessible, where everyone feels safe, supported, and empowered to thrive.
That's a beautiful vision. And I believe it's achievable. If we work together, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into the world of PTSD. We've explored the science, the symptoms, the challenges, and the hope. But most importantly, I hope we've sparked a conversation.
Me too.
A conversation about how we can create a more trauma-informed world.
And I encourage our listeners to continue this conversation, to share what they've learned, to challenge stigma, advocate for change, because together we can make a difference.
Thank you for joining us on this journey of discovery. Until next time, keep diving deep, keep questioning, and keep those conversations going.